The Revenant by Michael Punke, or Punke, I'm not sure which. Anyway, you may have seen the film The Revenant, the one that earned Leo his long overdue Oscar, but did you know that that movie was based on a book? Sort of, not really actually. In fact, it's kind of an odd case of adaptation when it comes to that movie, but I'll talk about that. But anyway, I found this book in the bargain stack at the bookstore, and I can't pass up a good bargain. But I decided, I'm going to read that book. I'm going to see how it compares to the movie. And I have to say, I'm really quite glad that I picked up The Revenant because I ended up finding it quite enjoyable, really. And I'm going to tell you all about it. So, first, I'm going to talk about the book, and then I'll talk about how it compares to the film because they're really radically different beasts, actually. But anyway, so what is the story of The Revenant, if you do not know? The Revenant, both the book and the movie, is based on a true story, one much more faithfully than the other. The true story of Hugh Glass. Hugh Glass was a fur trapper and mountain man in the early 1800s who one day got mauled by a bear and was not expected to survive. So the company of men that he was with selected two of their members to remain with Glass until he passed away and then give him a decent burial. These two men being John Fitzgerald and allegedly the perhaps the most famous mountain man of all, Jim Bridger, who at that point in time was just a young, pretty much basically just a kid. But they did not do their job. In fact, they stole Mr. Glass's rifle and knife, and then they left him for dead. But he did not die. He miraculously dragged his mutilated ass across hundreds of miles of wilderness, surviving starvation, the elements, and hostile natives, hell bent on revenge. And that's pretty much the story of The Revenant. It's a pretty straightforward tale of revenge and survival. So, first of all, this book hews very closely to the true story, insofar as it can. The story of Hugh Glass, The Revenant, it's kind of ambiguous. It got passed down more by word of mouth, and so it's kind of debatable how much of it is really true. But what is pretty much inarguable is that Hugh Glass was a mountain man who got tore up by a bear and was not expected to survive, and his so-called friends ripped him off and left him for dead, but he came back, and he was out for blood at that point. And this book, like I said, sticks really closely to that. It's pretty much, I think it hews as closely to that story as Michael Punke or Punke really could. So let's talk about the writing of The Revenant. The writing in this book is pretty good, actually. It's not the most striking or memorable, but it's not bad. It is not badly worded. It's very concise. Michael Punke or Punke uses very precise wording in this. It's very direct, not a lot of flash and dazzle to it, but it's not badly worded, like I said. In fact, some of the descriptions of the scenery and the landscape in this book are quite nice, actually. So all in all, I found the writing in The Revenant to be pretty good. But now let's talk about the characters in this book, because that is the book's major failing, is the characters. So the characters in The Revenant, simply put, aren't very good. They're not very deep. So our three principal characters are Hugh Glass, John Fitzgerald, and Jim Bridger. And the closest out of these that the book has to having an actual, real, rounded, fully developed character is actually Jim Bridger, because he wrestles with a lot of guilt over the course of the story, because he knew that they did the wrong thing when they left Glass and took all his stuff. And so he is really kind of having to contend with himself internally. And that's about the most interesting that any character in this book gets. Hugh Glass himself is not particularly interesting, actually. So Mr. Punk or Punky, whatever it is, he gives backstory to these characters, but he doesn't really flesh them out much in terms of personal attributes. So we get some backstory on Hugh Glass that he was actually a sailor at one point who was pressed into piracy and then escaped that and became a mountain man and trapper. But that's about as deep as it goes with his character. And the book doesn't spend really much time on his mentality, on the internal landscape of the character. It spends a lot of time talking about the external landscape that Hugh Glass is navigating, but not much on his interior. And that's the real weakness. So it tells us that after, Fitzgerald and Bridger take his rifle and his knife and, leave him to die. He's pissed off about that, as anyone probably would be. And so he sets out to get his retribution for that. But it doesn't really ram home any emotion with that. In fact, it's remarkably flat emotionally. It kind of just tells us that, he's mad. He wants to kill those guys and get his stuff back. But it doesn't really make you feel that. You don't ever really feel that this guy is an agent of vengeance, hell bent on enacting his wrath against those who wronged him. It just kind of tells you that, and then it just doesn't really connect emotionally. Um, Fitzgerald also has some backstory, and the backstory of these characters are just like dumped in info dump exposition blocks. Not the most elegant delivery of backstory, but it gets the job done, I guess. But Fitzgerald is just this kind of relentlessly unpleasant character that you really want Glass to kill him at the end because of just how slimy he really is. Just what a complete piece of trash he is as a man. But yeah, the characters are really the book's main failing. They're not that deep at all. They're kind of like stock characters. But the story of the Revenant is pretty thrilling. It's pretty exciting, actually, and it's, I think, pretty well researched historically. The Western genre is a genre that doesn't get a lot of respect academically. You have a few examples of literary westerns like Butcher's Crossing, Blood Meridian. This book is nowhere near the level of those books, but it's higher than a lot of western books out there because this is, I think, pretty much considered a western. It takes place on the American frontier, so it's a western, I guess. But it's more than pulp because a lot of the books that comprise the Western genre are pulp. Zane Grey, Louis L'Amour, and I'm not at all, knocking that. Those books are can be really entertaining. If you could see on my shelves over here, I have quite a few Louis L'Amour books myself. But this book is more than that. It's pretty well researched. It gives kind of I think, at least a relatively authentic glimpse of the time as well as kind of the physicality of things, that the technology that these people had to work with, like old muskets and kind of like flintlock firearms and everything. It's more than pulp, but it's not on the level of like Butcher's Crossing or Blood Meridian, certainly. But it's a pretty good book. The writing is good, pretty crisp, and again concise. The characters are pretty flat, but the story is exciting. And if you like action, I'm sure it'll suit you because there's a lot of Indian attacks in this. There really is a lot of violence, and it moves pretty quickly too. Okay, so that's the book, and now let's talk about how it compares to the film because they're nothing alike, actually. I was kind of surprised that this book is nothing like the film that was nominally based upon it, and that's really the main thing to note is that the film really isn't based on this book. And so that begs the question, why would the filmmakers buy the film rights to this book if they didn't actually plan on adapting it? Well, I think They probably just wanted the name because the title, The Revenant, is, pretty badass. A revenant is a word that means someone who has returned from the grave, like a vengeful spirit. And so I think they probably just wanted the name for the movie because the movie, again, is just entirely different. For one, in the movie, they had to give Glass more complex and emotional motivations for his revenge rather than just they they stole his stuff and left him for dead. So in the movie he has a son named Hawk who Fitzgerald murders. That's not historically accurate. And also there are some anachronisms in that movie. I think, like if I remember correctly, Fitzgerald at one point talks about joining like the Texas Rangers. I don't think Texas was even a state at the time that that movie takes place. So I think there probably could have been some more research put into that. This book is pretty accurate, I think. The movie, not so much. But and they had to make it a little bit more complex than just he wants his crap back. And but there are still some similarities, namely in the character of Fitzgerald. They're pretty one to one in both movie and book. It is just this relentlessly dislikable, unpleasant character. And by the way, Tom Hardy played the shit out of that role in that movie. That's the real star of that movie, was Tom Hardy playing the mountain man, John Fitzgerald. Excellent performance there. And I guess Jim Bridger kind of lines up relatively well between the book and movie. He's kind of guilt ridden. He's young. He's a kid. And in both the book and the movie, Glass does not kill Jim Bridger. Obviously not, because Jim Bridger went on to do a lot of stuff in his own right. And Glass kind of forgives him because he knows he's just basically a scared kid, and so he doesn't really hold it against him. The main object of the ire is Fitzgerald. But if it came down to it, if you were to ask me which one I preferred, this book or a movie, I think, me, ever the contrarian, I think I would actually go with this, and it has to do with the ending. So the ending to the film I thought was pretty weak. In fact, I don't even think they really knew how to end that film. So at the end, he, fights Fitzgerald. Pretty good fight sequence. But then he just decides that he's not going to kill him because revenge is wrong. They tried to go with the old tried and true revenge is not the way message, but it didn't really make much sense at that point. And so the Indians ultimately kill Fitzgerald. I don't understand why it's okay if they kill him, but it's not okay if Glass does it. Don't know. And then it just ends with him staring into the camera. It's kind of predictable. And again, I don't really think it made much sense. And I'm kind of tired of the hero learns at the very end that revenge is wrong. It's not that I disagree with that message, but we see that a lot. The hero is wronged and then sets out on a bloody path of vengeance, only to realize at the very end that revenge is not the way, and so he spares the bad guy. It kind of wanted to do that, I think, and it didn't really make much sense in the context. But this made more sense, and this adhered to history pretty closely. So in the book, and I think in real life, Fitzgerald actually ended up enlisting in the army, and so Glass could not kill him actually, because you kill an enlisted man, and then Uncle Sam's going to be pretty pissed. So he was prevented from having his vengeance due to circumstances. However, in the book, he does get his treasured rifle back, which was what he was predominantly pissed that they stole, was his rifle, which he valued highly, as you would if you're a mountain man. So he gets that back, and so he kind of just breaks even at the end, and he just goes his own way. And I found that a more satisfying ending than in the film. And I'm not saying that the movie's bad by any means. I think it's a very well made movie. That Indian attack scene in the beginning is really something to behold. But I just thought it kind of petered out towards the end. I didn't like the ending. I thought it was weak, mixed signals, with the ultimate message I guess it was trying to send, and then all the trippy dream sequences. I felt it was just trying to, puff itself up a little bit and try to pretend it was more than just a pretty standard revenge story. So all in all, I think I would actually go with this. So to rate The Revenant by Michael Punke, I'm going to give this book a good solid B. I am. It's a really good novel and a really good Western novel. Again, so many of the books that comprise the Western genre are just kind of, pulpy material, but this isn't. Again, it's not on the level of like Butcher's Crossing or Blood Meridian, but it's somewhere in the middle. It's definitely more than pulp, and it's a really respectable and in some ways a commendable book in its own right. So yeah, I'm going to give The Revenant a B. So The Revenant by Michael Punke. Have you read The Revenant? Or have you seen the movie? If you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about either one, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said today. And if you haven't read The Revenant, I could recommend it actually, especially if you get it at a price like I did. It's a good book. Maybe not the most mind blowing thing you're ever going to read, but if you like well researched historical novels that are exciting, um, maybe not the most compelling in terms of character, but pretty visceral nonetheless, then I could really recommend this. I think it will more than suit you. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.